Welcome back, our amazing community, to Waking Up Solutionary TV with Dr. Tatiana. We are still following a line of empowerment and disclosure. And when I have shared in past shows that there was a wealth of contacts and connections and really powerful testimony at the Dimensions of Disclosure conference in Loveland back in August, I was not kidding. And we have another special guest here tonight that just could not be missed. Help me join and welcome Niara Isley. Let me tell you about her. She is here to remind us that Facing the Shadow, a book that she brought out after going through an ordeal of recognizing that missing time, potentially very traumatic, things being done to her against her will, and that she may have needed to repress for a period of time, like many of us have when we've gone through traumas in our lives, and then need to bring through for our integration and our full healing, is a story that needs to be shared. She is the author of Facing the Shadow, Embracing the Light, a journey of spirit retrieval and awakening. She did go through a period of time with which she had missing time. We'll let her tell us a little bit more about that. But what I experienced and what really inspired me to bring Niara on was watching her on stage. She had a contagious spirit of optimism, of joy. She had re-embraced everything that mattered in her life that made it worth recrafting anew. So again, welcome, Niara. So glad you could join us tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here with you too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You came so highly recommended from others that have been on the show. And I really didn't need all that recommendation, but it made sure that we got you scheduled because you are in demand. You're a busy lady and you've got a lot going on with all of the teaching and the speaking and the writing that you were doing. Let's kind of start with how you were called to be involved with Dimensions of Disclosure. How did that crowd end up being the landing zone that we were fortuitous enough to meet there?
Well, it kind of started with Cosmic Disclosure and all the interviewees they had on the show, and people were putting in the comments on the Cosmic Disclosure episode, you really should have Niara Isley on because she is another experiencer. And so finally, David Wilcock and Corey Good, they had me on the show, and it was it was really an interesting experience to be on that. But what really captured people's attention, in addition to my story, was, I think, the statement I made at the end about consciousness being key
Yes.
to shifting our reality. But it's something that we must wield together as a unity consciousness, all of us coming together. And I have never seen the world at a time when it's been more polarized than it is right now, especially after the 2016 election process here. And so anyway, I just said that, we could use consciousness united to shift our reality and to make the things happen here on this planet the way we want them. Then it doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter who's president.
Well, and we might find our systems morph accordingly, right, Niara? Because the fact of the matter is that the way that our current quote unquote democracy is set up is an idealist concept rather than something that is actually currently deployed or factual. We don't know how much the wool that's been pulled over our eyes and the powers that be really are allowing us to be able to exact the democratic process the way that all of us would like to. But if there is that consciousness shift, as you've said, whether it is to create regenerative systems and new policies for the people and greater equality and equanimity, or to even get over the traumas, as we'll talk about a little bit, today, and how every single one of us has gone through something that is going to challenge us, maybe not be traumatic directly, but all of those lean towards the need for this shift in consciousness. So this might be a great place to just broach the topic. Share with us the Consciousness Initiative. This feels like it's a loaded topic that's got a lot of ripe fruit for us tonight.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of other people out there that have consciousness initiatives of one type or another going, but not in the way that I'm doing it. The way that I'm doing it is to try to get people to understand all the forces that have tried to divide us and have done a really good job of it down through the eons, all the way back to human prehistory, when we were meddled with by ETs that came here and wanted to use us for their own ends. They disconnected parts of our DNA. They used physical, mental, emotional types of indoctrination to terrify us and traumatize us into obedience, to make us think that we're just small individuals with no real power. And if we thought of anything to do with consciousness, they would just write it off as imagination. Even just a case in point is the Spanish Inquisition in Spain, when the church was going around and burning people at the stake and torturing people into giving confessions that the church wanted them to give. And it was terrifying for the population. And I can imagine hundreds of years after that, if a child was born that exhibited special talents or special consciousness abilities, the parents may have spanked them or beaten them into not expressing those things at all because of their fear of the church.
Right.
So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about indoctrination, to shut down consciousness and to make sure that we never even approached it. Except now in these later years, especially with the advent of the book, The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot.
I love that book. Yep, that's a classic.
Yeah, excellent book. And then the other one was years later, the movie What the Bleep Do We Know?
Right.
And then the other movie that came out a couple years later called The Secret. You know, here we're really starting to touch on those depths of consciousness that each one of us hold within. But the thing that I learned from Dr. Dean Rodden when I was writing my book, is that he said that consciousness works much better in unity when many people are together working with it. Right. He said, basically, if you're an individual and you're pouring a bunch of consciousness and intention on winning the lottery, and then the day comes and you don't win it time after time, he said that's because the entire world doesn't care whether you win the lottery. But if we can get everybody together on board in unity consciousness, if they understand that we've been divided and conquered on purpose, that all kinds of means have been used to make that happen, and we've spun out the matrix of the current reality that we live in from our consciousness. It's our consciousness that has created that. Yeah. And our consciousness has been farmed, managed, and controlled by the powers that be to spin out this version of reality that they want us to live, that keeps us subject to them. Right. Once people understand that, once they get that down in the cells of their body, that is an absolute truth, then I believe many of us will be inspired to come together and use unity consciousness to shift our reality to where we want it to be.
Now, Niara, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we have a caller that's already in the queue, and let's go ahead and take this call. Welcome to Solutionary TV. You've got Dr. Tatiana and Niara Isley. You have a question for us.
Oh, hello, ladies. This is Joy.
Hello, Joy.
Thank you for taking my call.
Absolutely.
Hi.
Welcome, Joy. Joy, you're one of the many and actually one of the first that said you've got to get Niara on the show, and she is here, and I think it is perfect that you are able to check in with us. Do you have a question for Niara?
I absolutely do. And I do just want to take an opportunity to just thank Niara for her courage and continued work. She's definitely been such a powerful way shower and healer in our community, you know, and I've learned so much from her work personally. But I do have a question. I would just like to hear Niara speak to a little bit about, as we're coming through disclosure, you know, how would you suggest that one kind of reconcile their anger towards the darkness they're seeing being exposed and, you know, in the outer world right now, and to shift themselves more into a place of healing? Because I know you've had tremendous experience doing so.
Yeah, I went through so many emotional ups and downs with PTSD over the last 4 years. I've learned firsthand what anger can really do. Uncontrolled and allowed to run rampant through the body, it just burns out the nervous system, and to no good end. And I've learned that emotional energy is just like the same kind of energy of gas in your car or the money in your wallet. Emotional energy is very, very powerful. And the powers that be, again, the Illuminati, the controlled media, they want to make sure that we're continuing to spend that emotional energy in anger, fear, and hatred to whatever extreme they can push us. And they want us to keep us spending that emotional energy so that we never get that emotional energy together in a positive way and release it in powerful intention together.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding anger is a good thing. If you want to be angry about something, or you need to be angry about something, what you should do is do what, like Carolyn Mice, I can't say her name right
It's
anymore.
pronounced mace, but you know what? Names are tricky, and we know who you mean.
Yes, I know. So anyway, she said that if you have something that you're feeling strongly about, something that's happened to you, you need to find 3 different people or the same person maybe, and tell your story about it 3 times. And then done. Done.
I like that advice.
At that point, you have to let it go. Otherwise, it starts to become an obsession for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, because I was stuck in it with my PTSD. It just kept repeating over and over and over again. And I had a lot of targeting incidents where it was continually being re-stimulated.
Mm-hmm.
Then finally, I got to the point, the real shift for me came spiritually, when I was like praying and saying, please get these things to stop happening to me. Please, I can't take anymore. I just can't take anymore. And things would continue to happen. And then one day I changed my prayer. I said, please, Spirit, if this is my karma to go through these things, then please give me the strength to move through it successfully.
Mm-hmm.
And when I made that prayer, everything began to change.
Yes. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very succinct answer, Niara. And I want to say to, Joy's question, we
Mm-hmm.
are dealing with this personally. I heard her say we're dealing with what we consider to be evil or derision all around us personally. But we
Mm-hmm.
also are experiencing this as a collective, as families, as a breakdown in our neighborhoods and the way that we feel friendly towards one another because of maybe political leanings or just philosophical beliefs. And there is a lot of room for derision when we keep looking at what's different about us. Do you want to speak to how we are meant to navigate this time of challenge where it does feel like there's a lot of adversity as a collective?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I put in my presentation, and one of the things I wanted to talk about this evening, is the subject of emotional neutrality, learning to cultivate emotional detachment.
Mm-hmm.
If we're working with some of the worst elements of our society, these Luciferians that traffic in human children and do really horrible things. They torture them, they sexually abuse them, and they sacrifice them. And how are you supposed to deal with that kind of evil?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how are you supposed to do it? I mean, it inspires such a depth of rage in those of us that love our children and want to see them nurtured and protected. And it can stir that rage.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is if you allow that rage to run you in going after these people in some way, then you're going to accumulate karma with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I will tell you something about karma with people like this. That means that you're going to continually be in a dance with these people lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And if you cultivate emotional neutrality and emotional detachment, I call it the path of Kolinar for human beings, Kolinar being that Vulcan term of purging emotion. But with human beings, we don't want to purge emotion. We want to walk in balance with our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So with the emotional detachment, you can do the same work in the world, probably better and with more objectivity, of ridding the world of such people, but without accumulating the karma that the rage and the anger and the emotional excess will generate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that question, Joy. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that while you're still on the line?
Oh, thank you so much. I think if anything, just everything Niara spoke to really resonates with myself and my own journey with healing. And I think what the community really needs to hear right now. So I just want to say thank you, really.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us
Thank
tonight,
you.
Joy. It's always a pleasure having you call in. You bring great insights. You ask the questions that I know our audience wants to ask. And I encourage any and all that are already listening live and that have already been in the queue, 919-518-9773. Please call in. Niara is with us tonight. She has got so much wealth of information on not just talking about it academically. She's an experiencer. She has had to go through the release and the integration, as is necessary, of all traumas to make sense of it, to be able to do the kind of inner reflection that's necessary. Because we do have these defense mechanisms. We understand this through studying mental health. We understand this as we watch those that have gone through really significant impacts in their lives. We sometimes compartmentalize our feelings, our memories, aspects of our identity that we don't want to acknowledge about ourselves. And this is why embracing the shadow is so important. It really helps everything rise to the surface and gives us an opportunity to release what no longer serves us. So important. We don't have to hold on to everything because not everything was ours to begin with. One of the commentaries or the affirmations I do with clients, Niara, is I release all that isn't mine and all that no longer serves me. And we work with the breath and we work with the releasing the energy. But then there is a part of integration too. And so that's a big part of this consciousness initiative. Why don't you define this a little bit for us, Niara? I think that that would be really helpful for our audience.
Now let's see if I can recall my words. It's a broad-based approach to social change through the application of unified consciousness. And
Okay.
unified means many, many individuals coming together and focusing their energy and intent on the same thing, and specifically generating positive waves of energy to power those intentions and to power the visions.
So what I'm hearing you say sounds very similar to like the Maharishi effect. We know that when many come together and they meditate or they hold a vision, um,
Mhm.
Lynn McTaggart has been working with the power of 8. There are many of us that understand that we create quantum fields around ourselves as individuals when we hold an intention that is a high vibration or frequency. And when many of us come together, you know, kind of that biblical where
Yeah,
one or more are gathered in my name, you get this
yeah,
magnified effect, right? So that
right.
this is a tenet then of your consciousness initiative is being able to bring a magic mean together. Is there a specific number that you notice is really the sweet spot to tip the scales in our favor?
Well, I'd like to inspire as many people as possible to join in this. You know, we're not going to get everybody because some people cannot give up their polarized attitudes. Um, you know, the political arena is the best example, really, to look at either people love Trump or they absolutely detest him. And if you even say one positive thing about him, even if you're not a gung ho supporter of him, you're still treated as if you are
Hmm.
and reviled.
Hmm.
And I mean, that's the level of polarization and hatred that is out there.
Right.
And that's exactly, and when we do that, we are exactly playing into the hands of those that want to make sure we never come together in that unity consciousness to enact positive change. If you look at history and the way that I've done it, I have a presentation from the Mount Shasta event last year, Eclipse of Disclosure, and where I talk about this, and I really lay the foundation for people to understand that this divide and conquer thing has been going on ever since the inception of humanity.
Yes.
It really has been going on that long. And if you want, like I said, once you understand that, hopefully you will set aside your feelings of polarity and division and hatred and start wanting to come together with groups of people for a common good cause. And it doesn't have to have anything to do with liking or supporting Trump if you don't like Trump. It has to do with coming together and using your consciousness to make a better world for all of us.
Right.
And there are so many different ways in which we should have groups working on different issues, like all this extreme weather and the geological events. You know, we could have groups coming together, and it has nothing to do with Trump or whether you're Democrat or Republican, just groups coming together to calm the energies so that we don't have these cataclysmic eruptions that could destroy so much life, so that we
Yeah.
don't have the earthquakes and the tsunamis like we saw in Indonesia. You know, we could have groups that could mitigate those effects through consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
We have groups that could work on disclosure to completely apart from all the stuff that's actually being done, and just through consciousness shift it in. A good example is yoga. Back in the 1920s, I think it just was coming into the country at that time. People thought it was of the devil. They thought it was a form of religion, and they didn't want anything to do with it because they were Christians and everything else like that. But yoga was something that was really good for the body. It was really good for health, and it kept catching on little by little. And now today, yoga is accepted. It's in all the health clubs in the United States, pretty much, and it's just become a part of our consciousness paradigm, that yoga is there and it's really good for our health, and you can practice it as a Christian and it's not going to harm you a bit.
Right.
You know, that kind of ideas that we need to seed in the consciousness so that they blossom and they become part of the whole consciousness picture in our world.
Now, do you recommend for those that are trying to use their discernment skills better? They're really working on being much more broad and aware in their own personal self-reflection, because there is so much stimulus that is meant to create derision. We know social media has been a big one, obviously mainstream media for a very long time, but it shows up in pop culture, and it shows up in memes, and it shows up in music. And I think that when we've got so many differences between us, and for those that don't immediately see that this is a tool, maybe they never took a good sociology class or human behavior. Lao Tzu's Art of War talks about this. How do you divide a people? You get them to believe they're free, and you give them enough resources to be distracted with, and then very often you just create derision amongst them. You find ways with which you demonstrate other. How am I different from the other? How is that other marginalizing my experience, my rights, my freedom, my prosperity? And we just keep spinning it. And on a past show, probably going on a year now, we had a former congressman who had gone through as a Republican appointed congressman down to South Africa and also to the Middle East to go on peace initiatives. He discovered very quickly that that actually wasn't the goal. He was meant to be a patsy. He was sent out to make it look as if he was working or attempting to work with those that literally could not be reasoned with. And when he had breakthroughs, he actually was shunned by his party and served time in prison because he did not tout to the party line that everyone that we consider enemies can constantly be sold as such to the American public when someone actually does have this type of a soulful or a consciousness or philosophical breakthrough. It was really a phenomenal interview. So in a roundabout way, how do we help those around us to discern a little bit better? When you say things like, you know, there are those that practice Luciferianism, and they'd go, well, yeah, but isn't that an extreme, tiny little part of our population? Or what are you trying to say here? Why would people want to divide us? Let's just kind of take a little bit of a dive into what it is that we are going to be, just in a synopsis, a really small soundbite, what disclosure is going to help us understand about how easily we are managed as co-creative beings, so that we can move through that pain just like we have to. And as you have talked about in the brilliant work you've done with the Consciousness Initiative, to the point where we recognize we don't want someone else to think for us or to create that world for us going forward. Why is there all this desire to keep us controlled? What's going to happen if we've got our power back, Niara?
Well, if we got our power back, if we got our power back, we could shift things. You know, we could shift things. And it's not like a blanket thing, although it could be. You know, I don't want to limit it by saying it couldn't be that. But it's more likely to come about in little shifts. And I would encourage people that are trying to use consciousness in groups of 3 or more, hopefully as many more as possible, to start watching for the little signs in their environment that things are shifting. Because that's really the important part, is not only focusing on the things that are wrong, but when you're actively working with consciousness to make a shift, then you need to start looking for the little signs in your environment that you've made an impact.
Right. Now, did you use these types of practices when you were going through having some of these traumatized moments that were in your past that needed to come all the way through and be seen in the light of day and unearthed? Did you use some of these practices yourself, or did you find that they built on after the fact, Niara?
They kind of built on after the fact, because PTSD is a really, really debilitating emotional issue. And it's actually a physical issue too, because when you're severely traumatized, there's actual physical damage to the brain stem.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's kind of like one person that I knew described it this way: it's like a blown speaker. That somewhere back in the brain stem, you have this little bit of damage, and when the emotions come up, it kind of rattles through there like a speaker that has had too much music playing through it too loudly,
Mm-hmm.
and then it develops this rattle. And that's real similar to PTSD. I mean, it hits, and there's this intensity to it, and it just takes a hold of you, and it wants to burn through your whole nervous system. When I
Mm-hmm.
was really having intense PTSD rage over being targeted or whatever, it would leave me exhausted, because it was like a fire just burned through my whole nervous system. But it taught me, it wasn't wasted time, actually. It taught me the importance and the real deep value of cultivating emotional neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start feeling that first little niggle of some emotion coming up that you don't want to indulge, then that's the level of awareness you develop after you've been through this time after time after time, and you feel it coming up, and you think, okay, I can't afford to go there. I
Yeah.
just can't afford to go there. And then you calm it right down. Usually breath work is the thing that I use. Some form of breathing. There's alternate nostril breathing, which I think you probably know about.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you just breathe through the left nostril,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to find that your whole nervous system is going to calm down.
Mm-hmm.
Just breathing in and out through the left nostril.
Yeah. That has a
Uh-huh.
lot to do, again, with changing the systemic nature of the way that we breathe and being out of fight and flight and being much more in command of how we're running energy down through each of our chakras and our acupressure and acupuncture points and just stimulating different parts of the brain that have less to do with old reptilian brain and that fight or flight response, doesn't it as well, Niara? And I wanted
Yeah.
to let you know we had a question come in on the queue, and this is from Patrick. And this is very much to the point that we're already on and expanding off of Joy's question. And he said, do you think that all of this hatred that is being displayed these days, manifesting somehow in our lives, is here to create a toxic environment? Do you feel that we have an environment that's too toxic at this point, or do you feel that it's something that that we can manage, that we can shift through, that we can actually bring others through the density and the soup of it and help them be able to pick up on this consciousness perspective?
Well, again, it's about choosing what we focus on.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're looking at all the division and hatred around you, and I certainly see it, and I respond to it at times on Facebook with particular posts, but always with trying to point people back to how important unity consciousness is and why it's so important.
Yeah.
So it's really good to take it all in and see all of it. But some of it you really want to focus in on, and others of what's going on in our environment, we want to look at, like with what I call a weather eye. Okay, it's like you're outside, you're playing, you have a good time, and yet you're kind of keeping an eye on the clouds because rain was possibly forecast at 30%. So you're kind of keeping a weather eye on the clouds in the sky. So when you're looking at the negativity in the world today, I would say develop a weather eye awareness of it, where you're just keeping an eye on it and watching it ebb and flow and shift and move in different ways and things like that. Always keeping your focus, your primary focus,
Mm-hmm.
on the things that you want to create, and look for the evidence of them in your environment.
Mm-hmm.
Keep the positive outlook, keep the evidence of that in your environment. But I'm not one of those that is going to tell anyone to shun the negativity. If someone has been through a severe trauma, such as I went through many years ago, you have got to face every part of that. You have to move through every part of it. You have to realize just how much your anger at what happened to you is ruling your life. And then you have to choose to forgive so that you're not going to be in an eternal struggle with this throughout eternity,
Mm-hmm.
or at least throughout the rest of this lifetime. You have to make a choice. Do I really want to struggle with this forever? Do I really want that kind of exhaustion and energy dissipation in my life? Or do I want something better?
Now,
You
do
have
you
to make
think
a
that
choice.
if you had held that in, Niara, do you think that if you had refused to look at it in its entirety, that you could have actually healed and brought forth such a clean perspective and being
I
able
do
to embody this now?
no, I do not think that I would be able to do it. I read something, and I don't have it here, but it talked about trauma being a shamanic awakening. You
Mm-hmm.
know how shamans in various cultures, they induce trauma
Yes.
in the initiate so that he will have his shamanic awakening. It could be like a near-death experience or a hallucinogenic plant, but for one reason or another, it's a powerful shift of consciousness that can be traumatic, and then it cracks open that initiate's consciousness, and then they become the shaman
Mm-hmm.
that they are training to be.
Right.
And trauma, the kind of trauma that I went through, is very similar to that. It cracked open my consciousness. It made me think about things in new ways. I experienced all the emotions and learned that I didn't want to be constantly in that kind of wearing emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
So every bit of it teaches you. Sometimes it's a very hard teacher, but it's still really valuable as long as you learn from it. It's like if you don't learn from your mistakes, then you've wasted the mistake.
Right. And no one really wants to live in a habituated state of being that is a downward spiral where we are. You mentioned Carolyn Mason. I'm a big fan of her, and I teach courses that have a huge investment in her work. And she talks about the four main archetypes, and we experience them. It doesn't matter where in humanity you are. You could be born in the United States, you could be born in New Guinea, you could be born in New Zealand. But one of those four main archetypes is the saboteur. And when we're self-sabotaging, right? It comes down to, I'm not really ready to process something. I'm not ready to get out of being the victim. I'm not
Mhm.
ready to stop playing the role of the child. I'm not ready to stop prostituting some of my values to gain a little safety or a little comfort. I recognize that I'm cycling, and I see so much of that going on right now. And you mentioned social media, and this whole thing with Trump and appointing potential Supreme Court judges. It's amazing to me that we don't have enough of those that are feeling very polarized by this, that they can't see by now that it doesn't matter whether you are voting for one political team or another. They all have their shadow. They all have their secrets. They all have been dealing with, how do we play the populace in a way that keeps us in control? And I love your attitude on, let's get some sort of critical breakthrough here and move back into a consciousness initiative where we're working together. What would be the first step, would you say, when we're talking about the polarization just politically right now? Do you have any thoughts for our audience about what would be the first step to move in a direction that's more cohesive?
Well, I would say you need to make a powerful intention about what you want in your life and what you don't want in your life. And while you were talking, I was thinking way back when I was around 33 years old, and I didn't have my memories back of my trauma, and yet I had the PTSD. And I was full of anxiety, and I was flying off the handle with my kids and my family, and I didn't know what was going on with me. I was actually in a good relationship, the first good relationship I'd had. I thought everything should be great in my life right now. Why am I having all this anxiety, and why am I having all these emotions? And finally, I just thought I was so broken that I shouldn't even be here anymore, and I made a plan to take myself out.
Mm.
And then the day came when I tied up all the loose ends. The pets were going to go here, and the kids were going to go here, and so on and so forth. And I was going to do the deed. I was going to either use a gun or pills. And I sat on the edge of the sofa, and I said to myself, okay, you've been a spiritual student your whole life. So you know the answer to this question. Where is your body going to, where are you going to be,
Mhm.
where are you going to be when your body is laying dead on the floor in 5 minutes? Where are you going to be?
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I would immediately go to the astral plane, and all the emotional crud was going to come with me to the astral plane. And on the astral plane, those emotions could immediately manifest monsters of my own creation around me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that all through, and I thought, I think suicide sounds like a really bad idea. I
It
don't
sounded
think
like a
I can.
really bad long-term trip, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I sat there and I thought, well, if I can't kill myself and get away from all this, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, there isn't anything else to do except make an extremely powerful commitment to healing and wholeness. No matter where I have to look, no matter what I have to do, I am going to find ways to heal and figure out what's going on with me and learn to heal. And that's what really set my feet on the path some years later to discovering the missing time and what had happened to me during that missing time. And then that was a whole nother ride for quite a while.
It's so courageous hearing you share and
Yeah.
being so candid. Thank you, Niara, to be so candid
Yeah.
and say, yeah, I decided my life did not hold enough value. There was too much pain and there was too much overcoming that had to take place. So I just want to thank you very intimately for being so candid about that. I'm sure
Well,
there are many in our audience that needed to hear that.
Well, something else I'd like to say for anybody who may be listening who is dealing with a trauma similar to mine or any trauma at all, we can't really measure our traumas against each other. Your trauma is your trauma. If you're trying to overcome a trauma in your own life, you need to make a commitment to your healing, and don't whitewash over it. Don't do a spiritual bypass, which means, don't whitewash over it.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and feel it as deeply as you can. Tell the story to 3 good friends as fully and deeply as you can, and just continually work at understanding yourself. And it's going to be a process, and there's going to be backsliding. So please, please be gentle with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more gentle with yourself than I was. I could be kind of tough on myself. I'm finally learning to be gentle with myself at my age now.
That seems to be a rather common statement. I hear that again and again. Our own worst enemy, is very often ourselves and our own worst critic. And so self-love and self-talk is part of this journey, and unquestionably was for you, because you loved yourself enough not to take yourself out and put yourself into even deeper pain that you were maybe less capable of navigating through with the level of consciousness that you have now. I want to just touch, because you did open it up prior to the show, that you were open to talk a little bit about your contact or being a contactee, because that alone can be so traumatizing for many, and depending on what has contacted you and the depth of that contact and how much it felt participatory. We recently had Bridget Nielsen on the show, and she's come full circle with, I am not an abductee, I am a contactee. And I believe that a large conscious part of me that is very multidimensional chose this, and there's just so much cheerfulness around this, but not everyone experiences it the same way. So I know that you've had some experiences with the beings that we would refer to as the Greys. Right. And you were comfortable talking to our audience about that, and that there have been other beings, and some of those experiences might have felt violating, or they might have felt that they left a sting or a long residual impact that you've processed. So before we jump to forgiveness, which is so important, how did you process some of these contacts, Niara? How did you move through the shock to the system once you really understood what had happened to you?
Well, once I found the missing time, I had different hypnosis experiences with a couple of different people to understand what had happened to me. So for me, it was coming to an awareness of the contact with the Greys and the military abduction experiences and MK Ultra trauma at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had one to kind of contrast with the other. And I have to, this is going to sound strange maybe, but I have to say the Greys, compared to compared to other people that were traumatizing me in the military, what the Greys did to me was TLC in comparison.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It was just the people that traumatized me, the other human beings that traumatized me in the military were horribly brutal and horribly cruel. just beyond the kind of cruelty that your mind can't even wrap itself around. I
Mm-hmm.
spent probably a year or more just trying to wrap my head around the level of cruelty I was subjected to,
Mm-hmm.
because it was it was a good thing I came to terms about not committing suicide, because I spent a lot of time just kind of curled up, rocking back and forth, thinking, how can I continue to live in a world where this kind of cruelty goes on? You know, it,
And that's something that you actually have to share a little bit more, because I know you know the answer to this, Niara.
yeah.
Why would there be a sect of our population? Why is there controlling members of society, elites, cabal, Illuminati, dark government project leaders? Why are they capable of doing these types of atrocities? So many people don't understand about a disconnect that has to do with pineal gland and empathy and compassion, and a really truly deep dive into cognitive dissonance. Can you share a little bit more about how you were able to view it externally as an
Mhm.
experiencer, so that you could have some degree of compassion or ultimate forgiveness for those that had perpetrated these upon you?
Yeah, well, I kind of clawed my way up out of that hole this way, thinking that if these people exist in my reality,
Hmm.
then there's also people like myself who exist, and the people that have helped me on my journey. And I do want to share reality with them. And you just kind of work your way up out of it. You realize you have to just kind of come to terms with reconciling the fact that these two very diametrically opposed kinds of human beings exist in the same reality.
Hmm.
And the thing of it is they're all our teachers. They're all our teachers. I was doing a morning spiritual practice one morning, and I was having trouble because I really felt a lot of hatred for a certain woman Democratic candidate who ran for president. Who
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to even say the name,
Hmm.
but I felt real hatred for that person. And I didn't want the hatred in me anymore. And so I kind of turned it to my spiritual guides and mentors. And they came back with a real interesting response. They said, "What have you learned from your hatred of this person?
Wow.
What is she held up for you that you now know about yourself?"
Hmm.
And then I realized that I could actually come to appreciate someone like that person for teaching me so much about what I didn't want to have in my own life. And
Hmm.
that by embracing, or by having the hatred that I was having, I was actually letting her poison me.
We discussed this on a past show, and I'm going to pause real quick and just say to our audience tonight, 919-518-9773 and computers 2K voice if you're on Skype. We touched on this in a past show. If we allow ourselves to be so deep dived into digging up the skeletons of our past, if we have been traumatized maybe by parents or a babysitter, or if we're looking at something more spatial, those that have had the kind of contactee experiences where they've been maybe misused in government programs through the military, or MK Ultra. I mean, this is heavy stuff. Those that are coming forward and talking about coming out of these satanic cults, there is so much there that if you got stuck in processing and cyclically immersed in that energy, you can become the vibration that you found abhorrent. And we all know that that isn't our desire. You want to be able to know what is out there and what is being chosen by others, and that hopefully you are not being subjected to against your will, because all choices are available to us. That's what the 3D, 4D realm is about. Everything is available. You get to choose the full spectrum. But it doesn't mean that by becoming informed, by becoming active, whether you're politically active or you're creating, these initiative groups, as you mentioned, that are working on disclosure, that are working on meditation, that are working on wellness, we can't become the vibration of what we despise, or we have achieved nothing other
Mhm.
than resonating at the very bandwidth that we sought to seek some relief from. So let's take this step and go a little bit into, what does the forgiveness principle look like? How do we step into that place of better understanding those that have harmed us, Niara, so that we can release it from our fields and not have that be the frequency that we reset for ourselves?
Well, it's a learning process because I don't want to put it. Each one of us is born with a certain astrological imprint that lays out our life for us in general. And we walk this path, and our path is littered with all the things we're meant to learn in this lifetime. All of our soul lessons are right there on that path. And the more we ignore the soul lessons, the more the universe will get a little bit bigger hammer each time to try to knock us over the head and get us to pay attention to learn the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, it was having to go through all the energy of the emotions and the feelings and everything to the point that I finally learned I just couldn't carry it around anymore. I had to give it up. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be the same way for other people. They're going to go at that thing that they can't seem to let out of their energy field until finally they get exhausted.
Niara, we've
And
got another caller in the queue. I want to just welcome them onto the show and let's see if we can marry
okay.
some of your remaining comments in with their question. Hi, welcome to Solutionary TV. This is Dr. Tatiana and Niara. Who is with us?
Mary Carson.
Hello, Mary. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having the courage to call in. We're thrilled to have you. What questions do you have for us tonight?
Well, it's not a question. It's a personal experience of how to let go of anger and forgive someone. You must have compassion for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very difficult to be able to find compassion for some people. And so I can start with, I can feel compassion because they're separated from God and they don't know that they are a child of God. And so they're separated from spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way I have forgiven some really bad people.
Mm-hmm. You see them as not whole, therefore they don't have access to some of the truths, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Just to have compassion and gratitude are two greatest attributes.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Niara, do you have anything to add to that? We were right in alignment with that a moment ago.
Yeah.
No,
works for some people,
I'm
but
I'm thoroughly enjoying.
Mary, Niara was responding to your comment. Would you like to hear what she had to share?
Yes, and I'm going to hang up now.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to hang up now.
Well,
okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us, my dear. Appreciate you.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, Niara, please continue with that, because getting into a state of being able to envision someone that's not in front of you, it is not apologizing, maybe is continuing in the behavior. How would you speak to that compassionate component?
It's a process getting to that point. And it's, Mary definitely got to that point in her own life where she began to recognize that there was the separation, that these people were separated from God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very true of the Luciferian elements in our society. They're very separated from God, and they would rather harvest the energy of other living beings. So understanding that they're separated from God is a beginning. It's a good beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people like Mary, it's enough to understand that separation and then have compassion for them. But then there are people that can't get there through that path. And again, some people have to go at it and at it and at it. They have to have the hatred. They have to have the bad feelings until something happens to show them that carrying those feelings around is harming them more than it's harming anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And once they have that insight, it has to be acted upon. And then you start seeking out the ways in which you can do that. Forgiveness is a really important thing because, quite honestly, like I've had some boyfriends in the past who did some pretty bad things. And, at first I was really angry and I carried, I'm pretty stubborn. I carried the angry around for about a year, knowing that I shouldn't. But it was really hard to let go of it. It was really hard to let go of the hurt and the betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
But finally, for me, the realization that if I didn't let it go and I didn't forgive, that I was risking the chance of repeating the experience with that same soul in a different body and a different life down the road. And it was that really pulled me back and said, whoo, I don't want to do this again. I do not want to do this again. And I so much don't want to do it again. I'm going to forgive.
Right.
And let it go. And I'll keep forgiving until it's completely, totally complete for me.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so it's a process. It's not an event. It's a process, because sometimes you'll think you've forgiven and you run into a part of you that hasn't forgiven, and you have to do it again and again and again until there's nothing left, nothing holding inside that is left to forgive. And then you're complete.
I love that. That was so succinct. Let's see if we can blow that up a little bit more spatially, and then give everyone that is in our audience tonight maybe a practicum or a first step with their daily practice, because we're not just experiencing this with our immediate partners, our lovers, our spouses, our children. We are really dealing with a lot of global conflict and rumors of conflict and projections of conflict. And if we don't corral our education and the wisdom that we're trying to discern with the education and still bring a full purpose in being, then we could find ourselves constantly being swept up in the conflict, even with the best of intentions. So forgiveness being an important principle, Niara, what do you do, or what do you recommend for those that are really wanting to entrain with this consciousness initiative to get up every day? And like you said, there was the what was it, the weather eye? While you were taking in the hard lessons, the truth that there is a lot of corruption at very deep and very powerful levels, and you get to keep moving on as a way shower and as a light bearer. How do you cue those that you would serve into keeping the intention behind keeping their energy positive and keeping that bandwidth high? What steps would you recommend?
Well, one thing I want to say is, if you're not forgiving, then it's kind of like our mind is, computers are kind of based on how the human mind works. Okay. And if we are not forgiving, then a certain part of our operating system is tied up in that.
Yeah.
Tied up in that. And that's a part of us that then is not available for the full vision and intention process through unity consciousness. Whether you're an individual working with intention or whether you're working with an entire group, if some part of you is holding that anger and that unforgiveness inside of you, that part of you is not available for that intentional process and that intentional wave. And what we need to do is we need to free that up through forgiveness. Now, once you have gotten through a really big forgiveness that's been really cataclysmic for you, because you've been traumatized for so badly, once you get through forgiving that, then the other forgivenesses that happen in the rest of your lifetime, you come to a realization much more quickly that you have to forgive this. And you come to the conclusion more quickly that there isn't anything worth hanging on to, to carry into another lifetime and try to repeat it again.
Right.
Once you get that realization, so it makes the forgiveness process easier and easier and easier as you go through it. So I would just say to the listening audience, is there anything that you've been holding within yourselves that you felt like you could never forgive? Is there anything, a person, place, situation that was so detrimental to you, that was so traumatic to you, that there was a betrayal or something that you just are holding on to that and you can't forgive it? And then I want you to look at that, feel it, and then ask yourself how much longer you want to go on feeling that pain.
Yeah, pain is inevitable, but suffering really is a choice, isn't it, Niara? It's really, you've subjected yourself to a long-term impact by having it ruminate in your body. And Patrick, asked, what do we do with these kinds of people that don't have a moral filter, and at their core, there's just this abhorrent energy around that. And I think that this is the little bit of the difficult dance we're all doing. We may be able to forgive something that's happened in our past and still be aware that in society, spatially, within humanity, there are still abhorrent things that are happening that we would like to bring to a close. You may have some thoughts on that. I just wanted to touch on the fact that as one that is an experiencer and a contactee, and one that is very much an advocate of society changing into solutionary and regenerative systems, I recognize that there is a way to get up every day in my world, which is I am aware these things are going on. I'm aware that there is really heinous crimes taking place against humanity, from withholding healing technologies and energy systems, and taking advantage of the poor and marginalized communities. And we all have heard so much about Pizzagate and Pizzagate and pedophilia and Luciferianism, which is like the horror of horrors. But every
Yeah.
day when you get up, you've got to hold which vibration you're going to be. And literally, the first conscious step is I am not choosing those. Therefore, I actively have to be choosing something else. I can co-create and build quantum fields and attract others that are also creating something else. But I can't just sit in the misery and the horror of the revelation of what's going on in the world. I have to get up and actively be choosing something that is more benevolent, more kind, more healing, that will eventually pull down the veils that have been protecting all of the abhorrent things as he's spoken of, because there is no vibrational frequency that can match and uphold it any longer. And that would be the way I would answer it. Niara, I know that you'll have something wise to abut with that. What would you say to that comment?
Well, if I was, if I was one of the ones that was having to work with the energies and the actual people who are doing Luciferian abuse and sacrifice of children and things like that, I could do one of two things. I could be like a crusader and grab my sword and say, I am not going to allow you to do this anymore. You see the emotion expressed in that kind of a stance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And here's the contrast. Okay. Here is doing the same thing, but with emotional neutrality. What you're doing is harming people. And I am not going to allow you, not with my energy, not with my unspoken, unconscious consent. I am not going to allow you to do this any longer.
Mm-hmm.
I am eradicating that in my consciousness. I'm not going to allow you to harm people any longer in my heart and in my consciousness.
Beautiful. It's a conviction, isn't it,
It's
Niara?
the conviction, and again, it's not emotional. It's emotionally neutral, detached place.
Yeah.
It's critical to do it that way. It's critical.
And I'm really hoping our audience is listening. We really haven't gone into Niara's story because that wasn't the point tonight. We could talk about all kinds of traumas. The point is that she has taken it to the depths with which living or not living was actually a literal debate for her, because there was so much pain to process. Every single one of us is going to have something that catalyzes growth, something that catalyzes reflection. And if we can move through our own shadows and we can be aware of the shadows that others in our society are holding, and then we can draw very firm lines about what is meant to be released and what must be abolished, as opposed to what can be then re-immersed in or integrated to make us whole and healthy, we really can step forward and come out of this cyclical state of hopelessness that I think so much of society has been spun in, because we just keep finding new things to be adverse to one another in. And Niara, I want everyone to be able to find your work and your website. So now would be a great time. Direct people back to where they can find out more about your speaking and your book and anything else that you think is pertinent tonight.
Okay, well, my book, again, the title is Facing the Shadow, Embracing the Light, A Journey of Spirit Retrieval and Awakening. And it's divided into 3 sections. Part 1 is the experiences. Part 2 is healing, the path to within, or journey to within. And then part 3 is called awakening. And I went through all these different things, and I still go through little bits of them all the time. It's not like it's ever finished. I'll probably be processing this for the rest of my life. So, that's basically the book. Part 3, if you're dealing with trauma yourself, especially similar mind control trauma or MK Ultra trauma, and you want to read the book, I would get it and read part 3 first, because it's going to be a gentler journey. And then maybe you can go back and look at the experiences and the things I did to heal. Mm-hmm. That would have more meaning for you at that point. Mm-hmm. And it's available on Amazon and Kindle and hard copy editions. And my website is also called facingtheshadow.embracingthelight.com. And it hasn't had much attention lately because I've been very busy trying to put a life together after the last 4 years of PTSD and targeting.
Yeah. Well,
But I've learned a lot and I want to pass it on. I'd really like to get back to writing another book.
we are looking forward to the wisdom that's going to come out of that next book, Niara. You know, and I know that once you learn what you learn, you have to constantly be implementing it. It has to be the life that you live now, not just the story you tell. And so we are really inspired by what you have overcome and how you've come through so cleanly and been able to take responsibility for what you could co-create going forward. We're so inspired by the Consciousness Initiative. Yes, it's true. We can stand on convictions while we are looking something that is dark in the eye and saying, I am not going to give you any of my energy. And the exciting thing is when enough of us are doing this, just as you've stated, through this quantum or this magnified field where we've created a community that's empowered with drawing that line and only co-creating what it is that we want to see in the world, there is nothing that can maintain this old false paradigm any longer. It's a really exciting idea, isn't it, Niara?
It is.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us tonight, being part of this disclosure and awakening community. You contribute so much, and I've really been honored to have you here tonight. It just went by too quickly.
It did. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for you having me on your show.
Well, we'll have to talk about having you back on when Joy and I are doing some co-hosting. Every other Thursday, we're going to be doing One Universe. It will be Facebook Live, and we'll be working with guests. It's all about building this community because this is really what it's about. And Niara, if you would be interested in doing that, we would love to bring you back again.
I'd be happy to come back.
Wonderful. And I just want to say to our audience, yes, these hours go by way too quickly. And it's because there's so much that we have to share with one another. We get into one idea about disclosure or one idea about how our systems can change. And we could go on for hours about it, but this is where you are meant to hunger for more. We want you to have the takeaways where you go, you know, I really am meant to work in alternative energy, or I really am meant to bring certain members of our society into a place of understanding some of the backwardness of our systems. Find where you have a voice. Find where you can be contributing. You will be so much happier if rather than sitting behind the computer catching every little QAnon drop and every little disclosure YouTube, that you feel like you have a place and a voice and a contribution to this change. So I just want to welcome you to do that. Step into your power. Know that we are here to support you in it. We are a community. We are grateful that you celebrate and support and join us on Solutionary TV, because together, every single one of us are the solution.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.